welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Kevin Lynch. The civility paradox is a term coined in a recent survey by the IW Group, which is a multicultural communications agency. The term describes the survey's results in which most of the 3,000 respondents believe themselves to be civil, respectful individuals, but only 26% said that the society around them is equally civil. The 2025 U.S. elections took place last week, and whether it was civil or not, Americans were talking politics. I'm joined today by representatives from two organizations dedicated to fighting depolarization and uncivil politics to talk about how political discourse has changed and what the average American should be doing to bring civility into everyday conversation. I'm here with Brave Angels co-founder Bill Doherty and the Vice President of Programs for Civic Bridgers, Jill Carey. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so much.
All right. And Bill, I wanted to start by asking you about this idea that's very central to Brave Angels' mission, which is the idea of Americans learning to talk to one another again. What is it about that idea of that one-on-one interpersonal communication that's so important to democracy?
Well, what's happened in the last 40 years or so is that politics has become a core part of identity. And so when people feel strongly about their political group, the other side becomes strangers, they become aliens, okay? And so it's hard to talk across a big gap. And so part of what we do is to help people get past the stereotypes they have. We set up processes and we teach skills for finding some common ground, for connecting as people, and then the kind of other stranger thing goes away.
Of course, yeah. And Jill, talking about your programming, I know that some of your programs even bring in high schoolers, the young people, many of whom I'm sure can't even vote yet. What is the importance there of encouraging this civic responsibility beyond just the idea of voting?
Yeah, I mean, democracy is designed to be participatory. And there are many levels at which you can participate, and thankfully voting is actually just one of them. You can, in some respects, vote every day by going to your library and checking out a book, by going on a wonderful, beautiful autumn hike in one of our public forests. You can be a civic advocate by making sure that the drinking fountains in your community are turned on in the spring and turned off in the fall. And so those are just a few of the ways that young people can experience agency and power in democracy without needing to have the vote. And obviously the vote is critically important, but that's just one way to be a participant. And we want students to understand that they have power and should exercise it in order to make our democracy strong and thriving.
Absolutely. And speaking of our democracy, Bill, I wanted to ask you, I know both of your organizations were founded relatively recently, both, I believe, within this Donald Trump era of American politics. And now that we're in President Trump's second term, now about a year into it, how would you say that the role of organizations like your two, have changed since their inception?
Well, our mission is really the same. The problem has gotten worse in a lot of ways. And we're also thinking more about what Jill was talking about too, that what do people do after they reconnect? And so we are focusing and thinking more about agency, about citizenship as more than who do we vote for, and some of the change, be the change you're looking for instead of just complaining. Sure.
And speaking of that current state, I wanted to go back to that survey that I talked about at the start there. Jill, when you hear that statistic about how only 26% of Americans feel that the society around them is civil, how does that make you feel just hearing that?
Well, you know, it just makes me think of polarization in a really literal sense. So if you take two magnets, you flip them inside out and you try to push them together, they will literally repel each other. They will be repulsed by each other. And that's what we see going on in our politics, is when you find out someone voted this way or voted, you're repulsed by them. You're like, I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to know them. Ugh, I can't believe I engaged with them, right? And whether, you know, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, however you define the other side, they're not going anywhere. Right. And so when I hear that we perceive the other side to be less moral or less virtuous, and that we perceive ourselves as potentially better, what it reminds me is to be humble, to remember that no matter how I define the other side, they're not going away. And it's actually my civic responsibility to participate and engage with those people, to understand who they are, their stories, and the complexity of who they are beyond just the way that they cast their ballot.
Sure. And Bill, speaking of the flip side there, while many people might be thinking that about the other side, they themselves, as we talked about in that survey, they themselves feel that they're civil. They are a civil person. Is it enough to feel civil, or is there something beyond that?
I love that little finding. It reminds me, I've done research on divorcing couples as family therapist, and 75% of people think their spouse could have worked harder on the marriage, but only 25% think that they could have, right?
Right.
So we're dealing with some human nature here. But as Jill said, a lot of it is about humility. It's understanding that I may be coming across in ways that people find off-putting, even if that's not my intention.
And let's talk a little bit maybe about how to find that humility, because I know that you sort of pioneered the Braver Angels workshop approach that I know has been put into practice for many years now. Can you walk us through a little bit how that workshop approach functions and how it's sort of designed to promote this sort of civility, this humility?
Yeah, so briefly, we have two kinds of workshops. Engagement workshops, where small groups of what we call reds and blues come together with structured activities to understand each other beyond stereotypes, look for common ground. And the key is the structured activities that get people to listen to each other and try to understand the other side on their own terms. When you do that, you usually find some common ground, and so that begins to emerge. So those are the engagement workshops. And then the others are skills workshops, and that can be for larger numbers of people, where we teach how to listen in a way that the other person will feel heard, and how to speak in a way that they're more apt to hear you. And these are some basic tools. We didn't invent them. They've been around forever. But applying them to politics is something that people often don't allow themselves to do. So skills, and these are really citizenship skills for a polarized era. And so, delighted to hear that you work with young people, and in some parts of the country are not here yet. We have a Braver School Communities initiative going on, because this generation, and including college students, they're going to have to figure out a way to do this better than the other generation. So I'm hoping that students of all kinds can learn citizenship as engagement in a constructive way.
Sure, and that leads perfectly into my next question for you, Jill, because I know that a lot of your programming with young people specifically is a lot more long-term, like weeks or months long. How does bringing in young people for the long haul like that, how does that sort of ingrain those beliefs and those practices for them?
Yeah, I mean, democracy, like I said, it's a practice and it's meant to be participatory. And so we kind of want to push back on the narrative that there are quick solutions to polarization, even within ourselves. Like Bill said, we have to do skill building, and we also have to exercise the humility to get unstuck. And that doesn't happen overnight. That usually doesn't happen in one conversation. You might have an excellent conversation with one person across the political divide and think, I've got it, my skills are here, and then you go to Thanksgiving, and oops. Now you're around people who are a little bit more triggering because they're family. And so sometimes it just takes a long-term investment of skill building in multiple contexts to learn who you are in a difficult moment with somebody who has a different set of beliefs, so that you become more conflict resilient, and so that you begin to reframe conflict as something normal and natural, and that is within your capable control to navigate. And so we want to push back on quick, easy, simple solutions and really lean into doing long-term work that allows you to be and embody a bridger, not just someone who does it once, but who does it as a habit and a routine.
Sure. And I'm sure that those bridgers are then very engaged and very, sort of internalize those things. Then how do you ensure that they have the tools to then carry that out and maybe spread those ideas to other people in their generation who have maybe never heard of civic bridgers, but, they see them, going through those same patterns?
Yeah, this is why we are civic bridgers, right? It is an identity that we want to embody and carry with us. There's research to suggest that when you tell people to be a voter rather than go vote, they're more likely to do it. Because if we connect it to our identity, it motivates the downstream behaviors, right? So if I were to say I'm healthy, the downstream behaviors of that are eating a balanced diet, exercising, having strong and healthy relationships. If I embody I am a bridger, the downstream behaviors of that are engaging with people who believe different things than me, seeking understanding, being accountable for my behaviors, exercising humility, etc., right? So when we embody that identity, it becomes enmeshed in our daily lives.
And what I'd add to that is that we have local chapters that people can join after they've done a workshop, because a one-time thing, as you were saying, Joe, isn't really enough. You need multiple exposures and building relationships over time. So that's a big thrust increasingly with Braver Angels is what do we do with folks who have been to our workshops, and how do they continue to engage with each other?
Sure. And what Jill just said about bringing that Bridger thing into your identity made me think of what you said at the start, Bill, about how our political identity has become a part of our identity, and that sort of leads us to push away other people. Is it a matter of replacing that sort of partisan identity with a more just civic identity in general?
Well, it's not a replacing, and that the partisan identity doesn't have to go away. Where we say, come as a red, leave as a red, come as a blue, leave as a, come as neither, purple, whatever. But there's an additional identity, if you will, that transcends it. That is about the civic good for the country. I also wanted to mention, in terms of college, is that Braver Angels has had a 2-year project now, exchange program of students and faculty from Macalester College, your neighbor, and the University of Northwestern, which is the Bible school, a very liberal college, very conservative, and they come together, students every couple of weeks have a meal together and engage in various conversations, group conversations, and also doing one-to-ones, and it's really quite a transformative thing for them.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I wanted to go back to the survey one more time in the sense that it kind of presents this binary of civil and not civil. Either a person is civil or they're not civil. Either the country is civil or it's not civil. For you, Bill, is there a gray area in between the two where maybe a person doesn't have to be civil all the time, or they don't have to be consciously practicing that all the time?
Yeah, we tend not to use the word civility that much in our work, because people often think of it as superficial politeness. Okay, I don't like you, but I'll be civil to you. So we think about respect, for example. And I think that we should be respectful all the time. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be vigorous, you can't be strong, you can't have passionate. So I can have a passionate, in fact, I could critique an idea in a passionate way without being disrespectful to you. I'm not saying you're an idiot for holding it, even though I don't like the idea.
Sure, yeah. And I had a bit of a more timely question, because we've seen what some people might characterize as a breakdown in civility of sorts in terms of this longest ever government shutdown that we're currently living through, that we might potentially be seeing the end of coming soon. But I wanted to ask you, Bill, because in a situation like that, there has obviously been a breakdown in communication. The two sides are not working together, but it's because they have these very strongly held beliefs and these goals that they're trying to enact through this. Is there a situation like this where it's more important to hold fast to those goals rather than sort of rushing to compromise and conversation like that?
That's at a level that I don't pretend to understand. The power politics at the national level. I have my own views about this, and that we've had a breakdown of regular politics, and then you resort to, it's sort of like, again, I'm a family therapist, like resorting to leaving, walking out or something like that, or threatening divorce. So I see it that way, but how they've actually handled this one, I can't comment.
Let me say this. What I've noticed about the shutdown is that it's who's to blame, right?
Sure.
One side says it's the other side. And so the conversation is all about who's to blame. Well, we have 8 fellows who are all AmeriCorps Vistas who during the shutdown weren't able to be paid. They had to go to work full-time and have not received paychecks. They still have not received their paychecks. And what I remind them is that whether they support the shutdown or the objectives of it, or they want it to end immediately, the thing that's true is that their reality is not up for negotiation. If they can't pay rent, that's a fact. And they need to communicate that to their lawmakers, right? This is civic agency again, right? We're not in those rooms having those conversations, but we can actually dissolve that conversation around who's to blame by exercising our agency to say, this is my lived experience in the context of a shutdown. It's real, it deserves to be heard. And even if you think that the shutdown is valid, my experience can also exist as valid concurrently with that.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. And my one final question for you, Jill, I'm sure that it would be easy for some people to watching that just to think that you two are experts about this. You both lead organizations dedicated to this topic. Maybe the average person, they vote once every 4 years, but they don't really want to think about civility more than that. How would you sort of challenge that person to, as you've been talking about, sort of take that on a day-by-day basis on an individual level to become more civil?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say, when you say I'm an expert, I'm just like, whew. I like to think that I am a learner, right? Every single day, I want to be a better bridger, but I don't think that there is an end point. I don't think there's a point when I'm like, expert status, right? And I want everybody to take on that mindset, right? I want anyone who's listening to this to just right now bring to mind a person that you're in conflict with right now. Maybe you're not talking to them. Maybe you recently yelled at them, right? What is one thing that you could do to heal that division, right? It is within our power, both within our individual interpersonal relationships and in our relationship with democracy, to take baby steps on a regular basis, just to create more trust and more unity, right? So I'm thinking of the person I'm in conflict right now. I could answer the text message they sent me 3 days ago and just say, thanks for your patience. I've been processing through this. I'm ready to have the conversation. Do you want to meet for coffee, right? It doesn't take an expert to do that, right? It's within our power. And I just want everyone to hear that message loud and clear.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for coming in today. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Follow along at thecrest.news and follow us on social media at The Crest News for more stories from your campus community. With Bill Doherty and Jill Carey, I'm Kevin Lynch. We'll see you next time we deep dive.